Hi, welcome to Grimier Wednesdays. My name's Judy and I run Quiet Year Records. This is a collaborative effort with Grimalkin Records and rumblepak. We're raising money for a Virginia Anti-Violence Project who works to support LGBTQIA+ survivors of violence across the state of Virginia. And we highly recommend that you donate to them, become a recurring donor, find a local organization near you that works with LGBTQIA+ survivors, pay reparations, do what you need to do. Today, we're going to talk with Rafael Diaz, formerly a member of We Were Skeletons, and Liu Light, aka Yaya, aka Catnap, many projects. And we're very excited. Hi, Rafael, how are you doing?
What up? I'm doing well enough, all things considered. I stepped on my cat by accident a little bit earlier tonight. That was very scary. But today was decent overall. How are you doing?
I'm good. I spilled a yerba mate all over the floor, and so I think I just energized my house a little bit. Um, Otherwise, I'm feeling good. Light, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I've been working like a madman as I always am, but taking care of myself too. So
That's real. I feel like a connection between the three of us is that we all participate in, I would say, our own little areas of DIY. And at some points they do intersect, some points they don't. But whether it's in Virginia or in Pennsylvania, where Raphael is right now, I think that we see over time the connections get bigger. We see more and more connections, and the world gets smaller and smaller. So let's talk a little bit about DIY. Raphael, so you were in a screamo band, kind of scramsy, pretty emo, I would say. Could you tell us a little bit about like what do you recall? Like what do you reminisce about when you think about being in that band?
Oh man, dear Lord. Well, and I do want to say technically we're back together. Reunions were like permanent, but then the pandemic, and even then we led very busy lives. But we technically exist in some fashion still. But honestly, lately with the shelter in place stuff and with the pandemic and everything, for me the biggest thing I've been missing is just being on the road, just being on tour. Like I watched some of the Elliott Smith documentary from I think Jem Cohen or something like that. And there's just these shots of him just like standing outside a truck stop on a rainy day, and I'm just like, I want that. I want to be very upset at 5 a.m. in the morning, like not sure what state I'm in. I need that. And honestly, I don't want to give him too much credit because it's going to sound like I'm just like blowing smoke or whatever. But looking back at most of my life, I realized that like most of the friendships I had, especially with like other like cis hetero fellas, were like really shitty and really toxic, and a lot of them in the music scene included. But Skeletons was like we did not get along by the end of it, but like this was one of the few cores where like the relationship like wasn't actually toxic or abusive in various forms. We all just like had our own problems, and it's hard to deal with one another at a certain point. So the camaraderie going on tour, and also just like I don't really have a creative outlet anymore, or like an anger outlet. I don't like do martial arts anymore. I don't play in a screamy band anymore. So like I need to figure out something to do like physically and emotionally, a little bit more. Definitely miss that.
For sure. I think something that kind of perked my ears when you brought up is kind of being in like a toxic scene. And I realized that like we as individuals in this, nebulous thing called DIY, we all have our own values, and then the ways that they play out in like the shows and tours and like online presences, all that kind of good stuff, that ends up looking different for a lot of different people. And I feel like Raphael, for you, you're someone who does a lot of introspection into like your own role in just whatever community that you're in. Could you tell us a little bit about what your experience was like, for lack of better terms, being a dude with some guys and in some dude places?
With some dudes with some guys.
Yeah.
Repressed. That was a real trip. It was interesting being like burgeoning adults and just figuring all of that shit out. and also just navigating the weird pettiness that can happen among fellows with that shit. It's just, it's super silly. But like, you know, it's interesting because I even though I know a lot of these things happened, I struggle to find like a lot of those moments where like explicitly like at a show, someone said something like, you know, fucked up or weird that threw me off or whatever. Definitely folks like within the music scene, you know, popping off in different settings and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Like something that was pretty tough for me was like the way that dudes being guys sort of bond with each other is like dunking on each other really fucking hard. And for a long time in my life, everybody dunked on me the hardest. And it was like, well, come on, guys. I'm just a little guy. Like, this sucks. And, you know, and that stuff was definitely rough. And I guess, like, for me, one of the biggest things that also led to a sort of exodus out of DIY, like when I was 22 or whatever, oh my God, 8 years ago, was like, I really was there for like the politics, for the community, but was realizing like we weren't getting anything done with the political views we had. We weren't building power, we weren't changing policy, we weren't doing whatever. We weren't even like setting up sustainable like DIY spaces like they do in Europe or something like that. You know, where there's a lot of squats, government funded venues and shit. And persistent problems of like even more than racism, which you know, I would have seen head on, like with sexual assault, with like misogyny. It was just like so many different communities or groups of friends I saw like get torn apart in trying to wrestle with these things, including like another band that I was in that don't have to get into too much, but you know, just like the difference between actual accountability and struggling through that with people versus just kicking them out of the scene, like whatever. So like, you know, it was also like a little bit after Occupy too. And I think when, you know, I was involved in Occupy over here in Lancaster, I just got super disillusioned in general. It's like, punk's not doing anything for me. The revolution isn't doing anything for me. And now I'm out of college and I'm like poor. So now I'm just going to try to get a job and do things on the side. And that didn't, apparently working all the time sucks all your creative energy out. So the doing stuff on the side, like when I was a truck driver or working through random jobs, I didn't really take it all. But yeah, it's been a real journey.
For sure. It's really interesting to hear you talk about the ideas of like having these radical politics and ideas and wanting to see them in real life. I feel like that's kind of a change that you made in your life, going from mostly focusing on like a music scene over towards like organizing work, like you were saying, like kind of like figuring out different jobs and other avenues to explore. Could you tell us a little bit about like what really drew you to kind of change your direction, like to that specifically?
Yeah, and I mean, for one thing, sort of like what I mentioned earlier, it's like we were a band for like 4 years at that point. We started when I was like 15 and we broke up when I was 22. Like, it's a wild time in anyone's life. And so, you know, it's like really tough to be that close to people for that long at that age, especially when like you're stuck in a van and dealing with, you know, whatever thing out there. So just like the strain on the relationships, like not that juice not really being there anymore, but also, you know, I just like wasn't really feeling like I was having fun anymore or like fitting in or like whatever. And I knew that the cockamamie ambitions that I had in my head that somehow a DIY screamo band would be able to be popular enough to like be a career, like that wasn't gonna happen, right? And we were seeing it happen with like some friends like Touche Amore or Pianos Become the Teeth, but like even then it's like, wow, they got on a cool label and a really big tour and you don't see in the background like it's still, you know, can't scratch two pennies together. But and I'd say honestly the biggest thing that maybe points to why I leave is like why I left is why I entered into DIY in the first place. Like I grew up here in Lancaster, PA, super suburban, super white area, suburban and rural, also known as like Amish country, even though we didn't have many plain folk at my school growing up. But being like Puerto Rican was really tough. I was like super alienated from being Puerto Rican. I was tracked into upper level classes where there were only white kids. So I was like, definitely not white, but people are treating me like I'm not Puerto Rican either. So once I started finding out about punk, you know, it felt like a place where I could actually like be seen, or a place where I would feel seen, right? Or people would, you know, there could be some like-minded people there, which wasn't happening at all in Lancaster. And one of the biggest things was just like, I was tired of the sort of bullshit narratives that I was always given about like, just work extra hard, just be extra smart, and like you'll get by fine, like the bootstraps type bullshit. Because I was seeing how clearly things like weren't fine. And music was the first entry point that I had to like actually name that. You know, like there wasn't any other outlet I could go to in like 9th grade when like a classmate of mine like died by suicide, right? Like wasn't, when I was dealing with racial slurs and all this shit in school, like, and teachers not doing anything, no one doing anything, there was no place to like get that. But as early as 6th grade, Rage Against the Machine got that, you know, and that was like that, yeah, that beginning. And, you know, it's with how I've been sort of, with how I transitioned out of music for, you know, for quite a while, can definitely sound like, you know, I just rag on the scene, and I definitely used to be one of those people. But like, I could not be doing whatever the shit I'm doing now, like without music as an entry point. And it's still like super duper vital to me. It's more vital to me than I realized, you know, lately.
What do you think it means to be a punk, and do you think that's changed over time?
Oh man. So my favorite version of this question was asked to Orville Peck, which was, what does it mean to be a cowboy? In 2020 or 2019, which is, okay. I got the same answer for both. No, you know, I guess I don't even know. Like this is gonna get one of my really hot takes, because okay. I look back at some DIY like punk stuff, and even, you know, God bless him, Ian McKay and Mackay and Discord and stuff. And it's like, shit, we were like building a scene off of like bootstraps liberalism. It was like, we will be business owners essentially, and instead of like making sure that as musicians and artists, you know, as art workers, and I'm getting heated now, as art workers, like we're protected to focus on art and do whatever, maybe a musician's union or something, who the fuck knows? It's just like, oh, okay, be a musician and be a booking agent and be a manager and be all of these things. And I don't know, I like, so, and I still, you know, look back at it. So, you know, for me, like punk, it's like some independent spirit, I guess, of for good or for ill. But I guess it's just really one of those eye of the beholder things. Like I seriously am like struggling to answer that right now. I think in large part too, train's coming. I'll answer quick. I have to close the window. But live right across from a train track. But yeah, it's I lost my train of thought, so I'm gonna get this window a while. Hear it back.
The train of thought that's rumbling by. That's a really good question.
I used to be in a band, you know. I wrote lyrics and stuff, so good with words.
We all say that. We're like, oh, I'm so poetic, and then it's just like cigarette drags underneath the light post. I miss you.
It took me a really long time to like be okay with the old lyrics I wrote. Like looking back at that as an adult, it's like,
but we were talking about kind of like how would you define DIY? Like what does that mean to you? For punk, I mean, not DIY. What does punk mean to you?
Yeah. I feel like the punk thing is like is super hard for me to answer. The DIY thing like feels more grounded to me, but like I think I don't know. I think what I wrestle with is because like for the longest time I felt like a real part of this community, and then felt completely separate from it, and then like I don't know, I just like struggle with the community sometimes, just because like for me, I realized that I ended up creating like pretty thin bonds with people around just like the thing that we both liked, you know, we both like music, cool, as opposed to like deeper sort of things like whatever conversations you and I had when we first met in Harrisonburg and shit, right? Like that's
I don't remember. I was a kid then. I'm sorry.
Right. You were like, I'm majoring in some shit, some like relations, and
I'm studying social justice. I'm gonna become a researcher and save the world.
That's right. And I was gonna be a rocker and save the world. So that's more foolish than yours. But yeah, I'm sorry for being a total dud on the question, y'all. Bad material. I don't know what a punk is. What do you think is a punk?
I was like talking about this with someone vaguely a little bit, and I kind of like had this answer that was like, I think, or at least like, I don't know, I don't really have any like close association with like the word punk as it exists in like Western white, like whatever history, like who cares about the government, but like for me, I feel like it has to do with care, or like DIY in general having to do with like caring for people who aren't cared for by the system, and like in the ways that like the system cannot, like physically cannot like care for people. So I don't know, that's like kind of my vague answer.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think like one of the things that I end up running into, I think it's just like being from Lancaster and like being in politics and other stuff like that, where it's like I found the idea of the punk community like to be very exclusive and be very limiting, right? Where it's like there were so many people outside of what you would call punk who were deeply invested in doing like exactly the sorts of stuff that you just mentioned right then, right? But you know, if they didn't have a back patch, I like would walk right past them because they don't get me and I don't get them. And you know, a real powerful moment I had was like when I really got started organizing in 2016. We like set up a emergency mass meeting soon after the presidential election for what ended up becoming our organization here, Lancaster Stands Up. And 350 people showed up, like all walks of life in Lancaster. And that was a moment that I actually really, really reflected on as punk, ex-punk, whatever, where it's just like, holy shit, I thought the only people in this entire county I could relate to or get along with really, you know, were a few people that could fill up a basement. But here we were like the entire time. But, you know, we always wrote ourselves off essentially by being like, Lancaster is hopelessly conservative and shitty and yada, yada, yada. But meanwhile, like there are at least 350 people, you know, 350 of us alone and scared and not aware that the others existed, right? So
I mean, I think that's kind of, oh, sorry, continue.
No, please, I'm jawing on.
I mean, I think that's kind of like an interesting question about like how to define punk as like a set of like political ideals and like subversion of like cultural values and like the mainstream versus like punk as an aesthetic versus even like and like fashion versus even like punk as like a music genre. Like there's so many different kind of like facets of that word that like, I mean, personally, I think it's at this point it can like literally mean anything. But then like the more that we grow up, we find out what feels punk to us. And that doesn't necessarily mean like back patches anymore. And yet, you know, we're still being subversive and like, you know, defying rules and that kind of stuff. But I don't know.
No, I like that. And honestly, it like really makes me think of like, you know, one of the big things that we worked on, like when we first started that organization I was talking about, Lancaster Stands Up here in Lancaster, is like, you know, realizing that there's so much like loaded language out there that actually you can unload it and reload it with all sorts of different meaning, right? Like punk can be Ian MacKaye or G.G. Allen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both white men, incidentally. Those are the two ideologies. No, right? And so it's like, why not then, like, if for whatever reason, right, like the punk community is like deeply important to you, you want to organize punks, whatever, like lay claim to the thing and be like, no, like this is what punk is, and just own it, right? Because you can make it up. And so the connection here with like the organizing shit has been like, you know, we like talked about small town values and stuff like that, which sound like super conservative and super regressive. But we're like, no, we have like a long tradition, like of small town values, even Mennonite values of caring for your neighbor, caring for refugees, being able to see it, you know, like, and we loaded in this completely different meaning into like this sort of language that's usually been used to serve like the fucking ruling class. So it's a fun game that you can play, right? It's like, what do I want this to be? What do I need this to be? Because if it is, it's both meaningful and meaningless, because you can, it's so flexible and shifts as you grow over time too.
Something that you actually brought up with me at a different point in time was, I guess, something that I was reminded of now, because I think this is a term that brought like a lot of different ideas to my mind, and I would love some more elaboration on that, is something that you're involved in. You describe it as healing justice, alongside like things with like training and facilitation. So what does healing justice mean for you? What does that work look like?
Yeah, healing justice is like an overarching frame within political work. And, when like I use it, or when folks within, my organization, Political Healers, use it, and that's who I'm with now as a program coordinator, is essentially like making sure that within our organizing, we are addressing like the various needs that a human being like may show up need to be fulfilled. Also acknowledging the trauma both within our own experience and within experience of our lineage that gets, generationally like passed down to us, cultural trauma, familial trauma rather, stuff like that. So, it is, I guess, to start with like what it isn't, or like where I come from, but like went into it, was just like a lot of the organizing world is like, get your numbers up. We need to keep on moving. This big thing happened. Like, let's respond right now. Hey, we got to knock those doors. It's like a real stretch. It's a real hustle, right? And I was like in a setting in my organizing where I didn't necessarily have that push the whole time, but I didn't have like support helping me to develop as an organizer, to feel confident in what I was doing, to help give me direction. And it was like a nightmare. Like, I realized that I was always down on myself, beating myself up, like not being good enough for like whatever I was trying to do, with no frame on like how I was actually doing. And I was just sort of thinking about like, what's the most strategic or politically like right, sensible thing to do right now that will lead to the most power for poor working class people, like whatever, expand my base. But I was never thinking about like, do I have the capacity to pull that off? Right? It's like sort of like it's like for this show, right? It's like, are you going to never do it until you get like your lighting set up and maybe like a different like professional streaming shit, or are you just going to use Zoom for as you learn and figure it out and keep rolling? I was a person that was always struggling to be like, no, I have this perfect idea, even though I can't execute it, even though I'll die trying to do this much work, I need to somehow do it. So for me, like, healing justice is an escape from that framework, that hyper-capitalist, like, go, everything is linear growth as soon as possible and just has to be deliverables for funders. It is to actually, like, take a breath, and especially now during this pandemic, this approach has been seen as, like, super different and invaluable. I've felt it, of just, like, let's take a breath. How are we doing? Let's be honest about how shitty this election is. Let's, do meditations or, different rituals to, support us in this moment, right? So it's like not just trying to deal with the intellectual, like, angle with folks, right? But it's like knowing that, like, people have physical energy, intellectual energy. We go into the world and we get fucking drained by certain things and rejuvenated by other things. And organizing is like really hard, right? You have to knock a ton of doors and a good, a good day at doing that is like you have 10 conversations out of like 60 doors or something. You are dealing with like what feels like the most important, necessary, urgent stuff in the world, but you run into obstacles, and living under capitalism, we've come up with all these great and fun ways to blame ourselves for shit. So healing justice is like, for me, is like trying to actually take this approach where it's just like, we're all deeply traumatized by this system. Once again, both within our own like lived experience, but also throughout the past, the cultural trauma of colonialism that, my family and ancestors have dealt with as a Puerto Rican, of slavery, of all of these different things, which like you know, I'm clear at this point, generationally, like the way that some of that trauma has been passed on. Like my one grandpa who was like great grandfather who was a resistance fighter, a resistance organizer, but told his daughter, just go to college and that's gonna fix everything for you. And then she told my mom to go to, you know, just do college and do all that shit. And I get this, you know, neoliberal bootstraps professional script that for me just shows the length, the ways in which we've sort of been beaten down by the colonial system, right? We're just not trying to fight it anymore. We're trying to just find our comfort zone within it. And that shit sucks because we have to burn it down and build something new. But yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll name with it is big thing we believe in too is like using ritual, which like you do all the time. It's not just church shit or prayer or like whatever, but like rituals like fucking your morning coffee, right? It's tying a tie. It's like doing whatever things, and rituals can be good or bad. Tying a tie is very, you know, masculine, gendered, and all sorts of things packed in with it. But you know, ritual is something that you can, as an action that you can come to that has some sort of like repetition that you and others have actually like put some meaning behind it, to ground yourselves, to connect you to each other, to connect you to a moment, to an idea, whatever. And so one of our big taglines is like, we use ritual to bring cultural trauma into public memory. And one of the biggest things, like project we're working on right now, it's like a electoral campaign, but also just get out the vote, general campaign shit over the next few weeks, is like getting folks across the country, like, you know, Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color, women, queer folks, like as many folks, you know, as we can, largely from marginalized backgrounds, to be able to actually talk about their stories, their families' stories, the, you know, cultural trauma or personal trauma they've dealt with this year or, you know, throughout time, and actually like be seen and see others with the shared struggle that we're sort of wrestling with, and be like, yeah, like we're in a really fucked situation. This vote is not going to be enough. Like we need to build some deeper relationships with folks around us if we're going to change things. So yeah, a lot of that work is trying to invoke those deeper relationships and just a different way of relating to ourselves, to each other, to society, to history, knocking some shit down. That was like all over the place, but I hope that was coherent enough.
I mean, yeah, pretty like crazy thing to actually experience how like our inner spaces and like our own internal growths is like so like reflective, or like it affects like these overall like movements, and like that affects and is affected by like the overall like radical movements. And like I don't know, it's like we grow up under capitalism telling us that we're all alone and we're all like completely individuals,
yeah,
people or whatever, but then to like find out that we're like everything's connected to each other, and like the things that we do have an effect on the people around us is like it's like electrifying. Like what?
Oh, 1,000%. And yeah, and like one of the big things is like so many people approach this sort of work either in a very, like I'd say on one side, let's say it's like clubhouse thinking, clubhouse mentality, clubhouse maintenance, where it's a lot like the punk scene that I experienced when I was younger, of just like, we're gonna keep our exclusive little thing off from the side from the rest of society. And, you know, you, me, and this little basement, man, it's us against the world, we're winning or some shit, right? Meanwhile, like housing policy is still fucked up in your community and there's no funding for arts or music. So, you know, you end up bothering your like 90-year-old neighbor who's sick because you have a fucking house show, and then cops come, you never have the show again, ever, or whatever the fuck, you know? But anyway, so that, you know, that is like trying to take care of ourselves, trying to maybe like build a separate clubhouse, a separate space. We can't really separate ourselves from like the powers that be, the world as it is. But then on the other side is one that's just like, you know, change that policy, move, go, like just the raw mechanics of political change, of building political power. And for me, like healing justice is a necessary intervention to actually like synthesize those two, where we are dead serious about actually like running and supporting like very clear political campaigns, whether it's elections or whether it's housing for all, Medicare for all. Summer Lee in Pennsylvania just floated out a bill to decriminalize sex work in PA, which is wild. I don't know when, if there'll be momentum behind that, but, those actually big, ambitious, winning things, while making sure we're supporting folks to like take care of themselves, take care of each other within their community, whether that's more material, like mutual aid, food, medicine, rides to things, like whatever, or, more communal and spiritual things that are like healing, unpacking wounds, healing wounds, taking care of each other.
An interesting term that I've heard a lot is like, it's like blank space justice. So hearing about like healing justice, I kind of feel like I've noticed it alongside like restorative justice, which I don't think is exactly the same thing necessarily, but I feel like they kind of like go hand in hand with each other. And then I think about like, what does that really mean for someone to be healed, for something to be restored? How do we know when we've done it?
Yeah, I don't think you really do, because it's not like a I'm fixed sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, it is, one way of putting it could be like being able to reckon with the past while knowing you can't change it, right? Put down some baggage that we're carrying around with us, some harm that's been caused to us. And, so for me, I've been diagnosed with CPTSD, right? So a thing that I deal with all the time, especially like when I'm trying to work during this pandemic, it mixes with my ADHD. It's like, if I can't focus, like, I think I'm literally in danger, as if there's like a tiger across the fucking way, right? And that has to do with a lot of trauma around work, around getting fired from shitty jobs, around lack of communication at jobs, whatever. Model minority scripts growing up, never being able to have room to fail, whatever it might be. And for me, like, I feel myself very slowly healing through that, through being open about it, asking for support, being vulnerable. And for me, part of that is just being able to like understand that like things that happened in the past aren't part of some overarching grand pattern that's doomed to repeat itself over and over. Like, I want to synthesize that as just a fucking memory, right? Not a thing that's going to like wound me every single fucking day. So that's a piece of it, but also is like, being able to feel like you're actually part of a community, or feel like you are not so alone in your suffering. And actually a big thing for me deals with race and deals with whiteness, where, how can I unpack this as like easily as possible, or like quickly as possible without getting too jumbled up and shit. But so, one of the big reasons I went into the work was like really wanting to see an end to racism, right? Like seeing Philando Castillo and Alden Sterling get murdered one day after another in 2016 was like my big activating moment. And one of the things that, has been on people's minds, especially like for the longest time, is like, what do white people do during this Black Lives Matter moment? What does anyone fucking do? And for me, one of the biggest things, like, and I think like healing and connection, cultural trauma and connection to race and whiteness, I think for me, like, whiteness is this construction where people have completely forgotten about their cultural trauma. It's just, no, it's all good, man. It's always been all good. But it's like, motherfucker, 2 generations ago, you were Irish and your family was not allowed to work there. You were not white. That's like different, right? We have Latinos, Puerto Ricans, like voting for Trump, right? Like very light-skinned, Miami Cubans, 100% anti-comunista, shit like that, where people just sort of like systematically forget this shit that really hurt them, that like doesn't go away when you forget it, right? Like, I grew up not understanding that like my mom's side of the family is like literally Black, and I am like literally a mixed race Black person, Puerto Rican. I realized that within the past 3 years, because like my family never bothered to unpack the racism that they dealt with on the island, or just the different, even the positive messages. Like, my mom was raised being told like, remember, you're Black and you're proud. I didn't get any of that shit, right? Grew up thinking that, Puerto Rico is too small for independence. Meanwhile, later finding out my family fought for independence, right? It's like people wanting to forget that trauma, that struggle, but like we need to acknowledge it. We need to actually like look at like the fact that we have wounds and realize they're there before we can like put band-aids on them. And I just want to tag that with the restorative justice stuff. That is more for like, you know, accountability in instances of harm, right? If, you know, whether it's assault or just toxic dynamics, whatever, people actually being able to like work out the problem, talk through a solution with one another, and like try to come to a place of healing, of atonement, of accountability and trust. And one of the big things I actually like want to do in the work is I want to build out a cohort of men across the country, cis men, who are going to be unpacking like our gender trauma, our emotional bullshit. Because similar to like white folks, it's like ours is just erased. We're told, no, we're just fucking dudes. We don't have any fucking problems. Hey, guys being guys, am I right? But what happens is inevitably the labor of addressing those problems like falls onto queer folks, onto women, onto other people in our lives. Or we fucking lose our shit, you know, and bad things happen. So, you know, want to be able to have healing circles, you know, where we approach some of our trauma around gender, unpack the harm that both we've experienced, but also we've caused. That's a big thing. Nobody can be held accountable or move past shit unless they're like, yes, I did hurt someone. You have to at least admit it. And from there, I want to help these folks like build out restorative justice programs within their own organizations across the country, where men will be able to, you know, without getting police involved, this is a big part of like ending state violence, police abolition, prison abolition, trying to support communities and building out the infrastructure to navigate harm, to seek redress and accountability, like in amid conflict. And, you know, instead of just punishing someone and throwing them in jail or letting the streets sort it out, like actually trying to, you know, preserve some bonds within communities, right? And have a new way of approaching the way that we've been hurt or hurt others, by trying to like fix some shit instead of just running away, which I think is like a big thing that I mentioned earlier about seeing in the scene, right? Like sexual assault, some horrible thing happens, but because we only think that like only monsters are rapists as opposed to like fucking human beings, like we're like, no, that's my friend. That's not a monster. So that person couldn't have done that, right? Like it separates us from the reality of like, all of us, you know, have hurt people. We will always inevitably hurt people. But, you know, so it's not about making sure you never ever hurt people or no one ever finds out that you hurt someone. It is being able to address that hurt afterwards, right? Because otherwise we're just going to be having folks hurting other people in different communities. Like out of sight, out of mind isn't enough, right?
This is kind of a broad question. And this is, broad question. What do you want to see in the future? Like in a perfect world, ideal world, what does that look like for you?
No borders, no cops, no bosses, no prisons. Yeah, I mean, like, it's, over the pandemic, a thing that I've come to terms with or started understanding is like that my politics need to move in a more revolutionary mode. Need to talk explicitly about, you know, Marxist theory, about dismantling capitalism, about what comes next and how to get there. So for me, what I want to see in the future is an actual like revitalized left, multiracial, you know, left really real about taking the risk to step into the unknown and fight for a new system. So that's my hope, because time's running out.
Are there any ways that we can support you right now?
Yeah, you know what? Personal Twitter, say hey to me. I got good friend Raph. Follow me, be my friend. You know, big way to support me is to support yourself. Check out Political Healers at politicalhealers.org to learn a little bit about our Remember November campaign, to get involved, and also to check out upcoming events. Like we have weekly healing circles starting up this week that I will pop in the chat then. That's the wrong link. And yeah, and I know it fucking sucks, but just fucking vote if you're in a swing state. If you're in New York or California, I don't give a shit. If you're in a swing state, your vote isn't that big of a deal that we need to be so precious as to hold it back. Just go out and fucking do it. And then we can, fight Biden instead of Trump and kick his ass. Anyway, that's how you can help me.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you want to say to the world?
To the world, my friends, fellas, guys, dudes, right? Fucking cry and ask for help more, and ask yourself if you're straight. Like, when did I find out that I was straight? When did I realize that? And am I actually straight? Like, ask yourself all sorts of cool shit. Because we have a lot of really scary things, bad, hard things inside of us that we just are trained to ignore all the time. So yeah, join an organization, question everything, and fight for a better tomorrow today.
Very well spoken. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. I would vote for you.
That's been on the table, but I don't think I can do it anymore. I don't know how many open communist Puerto Ricans can win in my house district over here, but we'll see.
Oh, geez. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and for talking about, oh my gosh, so many really wonderful things. Just as a quick little check-in, this is Premiere Wednesdays. Anytime is a good time to donate to Virginia Anti-Violence Project. Support your local LGBTQIA+ organization. Support your local survivors. Be less racist and be accountable for shit. That's some good stuff. We're gonna take it away with Yaya, who's gonna perform for us. So whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
Okay, hi, I'm Yaya. I was once Yaya, and now I'm Yaya again after I wasn't Yaya for like a year or two. So I actually prepared some songs from when I was a DIY musician in Richmond and just like playing and also booking shows and doing the thing there. I had a little EP and I had some like classics and whatever that I played all the time. And so I went back and relearned those after kind of like circling around a lot this year, especially, and kind of like, okay, I guess it's tough to talk about it a little bit, but I've like, I tend to like run away from myself a lot, or, I want to like reinvent myself all the time. And so usually it's just like, okay, next thing, and I really don't look back. But I think like this year has kind of been a very much like coming into myself and like being like, I don't have to throw away all these like past pieces of myself. And actually like a lot of my past stuff is good and like they're very like honest things, and I don't think it's like weird for the me now to play them. Maybe not like the me last year, but like the me now, like yeah. So yeah, got just a few songs from 2015, 16, 17. And then I have a couple new ones that I had written last year, this year. So yeah, this first one is called TV. You said you didn't know where all this anger came from. Look into my eyes, they're yours, aren't they? I'm drunk on the feeling of having you around. I think I like you more when you're away. Does that hurt you? Does that hurt you? When the TV runs out, it's so dirty. When the TV runs out, it's so dirty. He said I'm selfish and I am sad and cry easily. He said I took advantage of how sweet you thought you were. When the TV runs out, so do we. When the TV runs out, so do we. When the TV runs out, and so do we. Sorry, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. This next one is one from last year, 2019, and it's called, there's an electronic version of the song. So I started playing electronic music and like using Ableton and stuff last year. And my live electronic sets are like very different. But you know, it's acoustic right now, very cozy, intimate. Maybe we've run out of lifetimes, when we only have two eyes, our own two hands, a body of our own. I am not you and you are not me. Heartbreak comes in many, many forms, some slow and steady, some ruggedly torn. I've known such delirium despair, and heartbreak that is intergenerational. What else there to do? What is left of me and you? What is there to do? What is left of me and you? I'll be a little smarter, but I won't be known. This slice of life's too precious and fun. I'll cherish what you give to me, eternally. I am not you and you're not me. I am not you and you're not me. This next one I'm actually very proud of, and I wrote it in the beginning of the year, and I was thinking a lot about like bodies and houses and what it means to be at home in your body, especially, you know, I mean, like as a queer person, but also just like in general as someone, just as like dissociated people who like can't reconcile the reality of like your inner space and like the physical reality of like being a body and being alive physically. It's called Cherish. In this house, the rooms always shifting, walls disappear. Running like my soul tearing from far. There's a single window at a time. This is right. Each day life is at the box below the stairs. Inside it is something. I hold it close. I do not know what makes the light that bears the window. Such a soul. Outside is the sea, and inside is something too fragile to bear. So I wait for something to rise. My body fell and shattered, but you put me back together. Oh yes, I can only say yes. If I tore off my body, would you sew it back up for me? Oh yes, I can only say yes. If I lost myself to nothingness, would you really come look for me? Oh yes, I can only say yes. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Oh yes, oh yes, oh In this house, the bones are always broken, flesh is twisted and soaked. All I am left of is something more. All I'm left with is a question. Thank you. This next song is an older Yaya song, and I don't really like talking about what it's about, but it's quite doomy, but I'm proud of that. You say you just wanna talk, but I don't really wanna hear inside. I've got all this mud inside. All this mud inside. I've got all this mud inside. All this mud inside. I've got all this mud inside. Outside the seas, riding away, silent to a land with the same silent eyes. Every time you raise your voice, and every time you raise your hand, all becomes mud. I never forget. That's right. Got two more. This song is my most recent song, and I wrote it. I was inspired by this anime called Revolutionary Girl Utena. I don't know how many people know it. It's really good. It's like this very symbolic, metaphorical shoujo romance anime, and it talks a lot about like what it means to lose your purity and innocence and become an adult, and like in that way coming to terms with trauma, and also like thinking about eternity and what it means to like eternity as a form. I associate eternity with death and as something that never changes. So it's kind of like if you want to remain pure and innocent, you're going to, I mean, it's like being dead before you're alive, or like that's kind of what the show is saying. And I know I thought about that a lot, and I think it means something to me. So this is called, it's called A Dream of Roses. I dreamed a dream of roses, spinning just beyond my reach. I dreamed a dream of eternity, of a star flying beyond me. When I reached out to you, I realized I was underground already done. I said, how could I broke the eggshell of eternity. It was empty. It was empty. It didn't hurt when love burned for it, seen it many times before. You've learned in becoming immortal that death becomes the meaning. The day that you and I were lost, and the day that I lost you. The roses and the planets and the stars were the dreams for you too. I thought I saw you it still is empty. Is this the emptiness we all came from? The emptiness that loves you all the same. I gave it my purity to destroy and love the pieces all the same. My martyr, my coward, my monster and shadow. Martyr, my coward, my monster and shadow. Martyr, my coward, my monster and shadow. Oh, 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 and what has become of me? As liminal space, borderline fantasy. And here, lost in the in-between. Between my two hands, sensations of living. And the space just for you. And here, a planet just for you. And a place just for you. And here, a home. A home. A home. I caught a faceless moon tonight, falling with a nameless star. I killed the eggshell of eternity to find my endless love for you. My limitless love for you. My monstrous love for you. My lustrous love for you. My bloody love for you. All these gray skies for you. And you, and you, and you, and you, and you. Oh. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. My last performance is actually a poem that I wrote. I make, like every year or two, I make a collection of poems and comics that have kind of become these like sort of diaristic, but not really, like using my life as raw materials to create like these abstract narratives and stuff kind of things. This is the one that I made in February, which seems like 8 years ago already. It's called Mirror in the Mirror. There's all these like comics and manga inspired, really intense existential things in it. And this one poem I want to read. It's called Stars. In the quiet vicissitudes of empty space, errant punctuation, musical notes wander like sea plankton, feeding on light, being fed to children who have no names and no bodies. This freedom is exile, as they are hunted by a black hole with an insipid hunger fueled by desperation. I know it only wants retribution for what was lost, but because I looked it in the eye, it resorted to taking my eternal children away one by one. When I reached out to take its hand, I learned that to reason with a monster, one must become one. When I could not give it the salvation it craved, I severed my hands and reattached them twice, and found that grief is an unpleasant orchid, sacrifice is insatiable, and fear is a sad and tired child. Now there is not quite enough of my body left, but because I am resourceful, I will not let what you discarded go to waste. The black hole is more than large enough to occupy what was hollowed out. It will become like resin, to plug the fissures in the walls and strengthen the beams and fill out the floorboards. The lights may have lost their luster, but they will glow a deep and impenetrable red that reveals form before function, although in the end, I prefer truth and prize beauty. When the bridge is irreparable and there is no way to return, I can only continue to walk, even run into the unknown shore. I am no longer afraid, for I know that when I need to rest or want to dream, I can take out my eyes and hold them up so they can see farther than I could ever go. This collection will be available at the second run through Quiet Year Records soon, so keep a lookout. Thank you.
Yay, that was so wonderful. Woo! Ah, that was really great. That was really great.
Thank you.
How are you feeling, Light?
I feel good. I was practicing earlier, and I'm always like nervous for a full like week before a performance. But you know, I think that's just the built-up tension of everything that these songs and poems mean to me, and then they're released, and then I'm empty good.
For sure. Yeah, actually, I would love to talk a little bit about your project, because I think you mentioned it before about kind of having like old Yaya and new Yaya. They're all still Yaya, but it's like kind of like an evolution. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of what you're working with for old Yaya and where you're kind of going with new Yaya?
Yeah, so old Yaya was very like primal, I feel like in some ways, that it was just like I would experience something painful, and then I would write about it, and I would like, it's kind of like, it was very raw and like immediate, and I wrote things really fast, and I put songs together really quickly and in very like simple ways, and like, I don't know, it was kind of like dipping my toes into like the process and action of like reflecting on my physical experiences and how they've been processed into like my inner emotional spaces, and then finding that I don't know how to talk about that, and so I'll write songs to like transmit these feelings, or maybe like someone will, like I always find like salvation in like art and music when I don't know what to do with like a heavy experience or something, and it's kind of like I wasn't thinking that much about what other people wanted, but in some ways I was kind of like, if I lay all bare, like maybe someone can do something with it. I don't know what, but I'm just going to spew it all out. And I think now, looking back, I can see a lot of like themes and like recurring themes and ideas that I still work with now, but in a more sophisticated way. I feel like now I still do draw from my experiences, but maybe it's because I have like more experiences and like longer, like I can see all these recurring cycles better, whatever now, but I feel like I'm able to like metabolize things better, or just like it's more complex and more abstract and more removed from myself. I think I'm more removed from myself now. And I'm kind of like spinning more of these like narratives, but like loose narratives that like tie into each other and become more of a statement by themselves, rather than it just being like me angry, me sad. Now it's like, here's a whole like story and like little bubble for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of feel like that kind of ties into what we were talking about with Rafael before, about kind of starting from a place of creating in response to just like whatever feelings you have going on in your life, and like growing up and reconciling with, you know, becoming a whole ass human adult, you know, and like, and with that comes with like the development of our art, you know?
Yeah, I think it's like totally inseparable. I think it's like, I don't know, like I feel like the reason I am so into art and like I find art to be so like precious to me is because it is kind of like when I meet people, I'm really interested, like not in a creepy way or whatever, but like I want to know that person, and I want to like kind of like, who are you when you're alone is kind of like what I want to know when I meet someone, or what I try to like piece together from what I know can experience with them or whatever. But like art is kind of like the most direct path to someone's inner world, and like the way that they experience like their life, their thoughts, their feelings. So yeah, I feel like art and people like are always intertwined, and along with that, like all the sociopolitics and like overarching structures of being a human in like the bureaucratic world, but also like emotionally, spiritually, like I don't know, like I wanna see all that.
Light, that you helped me figure out my answer for that punk question you were asking earlier.
Oh, really? Was it?
Yeah. Like, I don't know, just like through what you shared and what we've all talked about so far, like it just like hit a running theme for me that like I remembered was like always the thing. Like at least for me, there's like what punk was, and it was like me trying to figure out like the capital T truth that like felt like was being hid from me by like, you know, the social niceties of the world, right? Like you're interested in learning about what someone is like when they're alone, not when they're putting up appearances and, you know, just trying to be nice or whatever, right? And like similar thing with me is just like there is like something more real here that I'm trying to access. And it's so funny with the way you put it with like the primal way of just trying to be like super direct. It's like for me at first too, it was like super aggressive, like punk shit, or like, you know, literally hard to listen to, like screamo, because it's just the person just not giving a shit, putting it all out there, trying to like be as direct as possible. And I think later on, you know, for me, there are like different ways of trying to like come to terms with that and understand myself or express myself. And I love for you, you know, like being able to develop and starting to like really put narratives to it too, like shows that like exactly like you said, like art is the most direct way to like share that experience, but it's the actual whole art of it, not just how explicitly and straightforwardly can I put this out, right? It's like, no, like someone's going to access this truth by hearing the story that I'm telling, you know, and that shit just rocks. I don't know, that's just so neat. It's like magic. Art's magic.
Yeah, or it's like there's different kinds of truths and like different kinds of, like just like different kinds of feelings too. Like some feelings are very simple and like very primal. You can just like get away with like putting it all out there like that. But other feelings are very difficult and like informed by a lot of like very subtle or just like things that aren't talked about or have much language around them. So it's like you have to invent language, but precise emotional language in order to talk about these like very unique feelings to each person. I don't know, it's like every person has such a great and expansive world inside of them. And like it goes so deep, and it's so like, yeah, like every single person is like so complex. And it's just like, yeah, make your own language and like go as complex and like subtle or like not or whatever as you have to like realize and make yourself understood to other people. Truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like an interesting part about art, being both like a creator and a consumer of art. Not like consumer like shopping, like consumer like as in someone who perceives other people's work. Is that like there's something for me to reconcile with that, like at the end of the day, I can't read other people's minds. And, you know, as much as an artist can put forth what they're trying to say, there will be that limit of I have my own perceptions, you know, like there's that kind of like, I will never know exactly what's going on in that artist's head, even if they try to just like straight up directly tell me. That's just kind of like how communication works, in my opinion. So I have a question about the different mediums that you work with, kind of in that vein, because I know that you do music, which we all saw, poetry and writing, which we also saw, which is really great, but also like things like illustration, animation, performance art, like other kinds of visual arts, sculpture, like things like that. Those are all different forms of expression, which I think are very interesting, and they all lead back to you. So what's been your experience with kind of navigating different art forms? And do you think that how would you compare the ways that people interact and respond with your work?
Yeah, oh wow, that's so much. So I definitely think of all these different mediums as like different ways to approach like the same core themes that I feel like I write about. I feel like I have a consistent set of like 10 or so ideas and themes that I explore a lot. And I think they're just like kind of like different voices or different approaches or just like different ways to bring out certain aspects of a idea that I'm interested in. So I definitely am into like the idea of having like a multiverse. I'll have like my visual art and my illustrations complement like my music. So I feel like, okay, I've broken this down before by saying that like music is kind of like pure feeling for me, right? Because I don't really know it technically the same way that I do visual art. Visual art is kind of like my main tool, or it's very like, I can be very technical about visual art. I can be very technical about like the conceptual parts of visual, and theoretical parts of visual art, as well as like the logistical production aspects. I get really nerdy about like animating, like who animates what, and like, or the way that things are drawn, or like whatever. So it's like I understand visual art in a very, like cerebral, like intellectual manner. And so that's how, and so I explore, ideas and feelings in an intellectual manner through visual art, but in a more like emotional, like intuitive manner through music. And then like poetry and writing is something that I don't do quite as often as the other two, but I feel like it really informs like the heart of my work. This is like the most immediate thing for me. Like I don't need to prepare anything. I just need to like write whatever is on my mind. And that's kind of like the bits and like it represents and like kind of like marks the kind of themes and like whatever that I'm trying to like draw together. So in that way, I feel like I just really want to create a very like comprehensive, but very large like multiverse with its own little like niches and things. But I don't know, I'm like kind of still figuring it out, but that's kind of like where that's at right now. And as far as how different people interact with it, I think it's like an interesting reflection with like my personal like friend groups. I'm part of like quite a few different like friend groups, scenes, whatever, collectives of people. And so I feel like these different groups resonate with, it's interesting to observe. Like I don't especially have a thesis on like how people interact with my art, but it's interesting to see like, so this person comes from, like the noise scene in New York they're into, and they like this and this parts of my work. Like they like my animations, they really resonate with my writing, but they don't seem to be as into like my music or whatever. Or like this person was from East Coast, or this person from like my emo DIY days, and like they seem to be really into like my poetry and like my music, but like they don't seem to be as into like the animated part or like whatever. So I don't know. I feel like it comes down to, like every person is going to interact with different parts of my work differently, because we're all unique individuals. But I feel like what I want is to like nudge people into kind of like accepting everything, or like being curious about everything, or like to make these various connections amongst these like different aspects of what I do, because I make these connections between like poetry and like visual art and music and whatever. Like I really enjoy doing that, and I want to like push, encourage people to kind of have that same mindset of like making these unexpected connections, like theoretically, but also to transpose that into their life, and maybe like someone will be more open to a certain experience because they were able to like open that gate in your brain thanks to something that I did or something.
That makes complete sense. I think it's like interesting that you bring up that like humans are complex, and we have like a range of interests, and then at the end of the day, it's like kind of connecting those pieces gives us a lot of insight into the different ways that we can see the same, like, how do I explain it? It's like the different mediums that people use can be just kind of different perspectives on a person's singular perspective. Oh, I'm struggling how to figure out how to word that. Does that make sense? It's like, for example, like describing the same situation, but from like 5 different methods. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like there's something really interesting about that. And the idea of like them kind of building on each other, because it seems like the ways that you create your art is less about, what physical medium you're particularly, or what physical medium, and rather what best express what you're trying to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it's like, you know, if there is something that I want to explore more in like a theoretical, conceptual manner, it's like, yeah, I probably go for it visually first. Also, to think about like the various kinds of worlds that these various mediums, I'm like very anti-medium, but you know, these various worlds that these mediums exist in, like art has, you know, there's like zines and like kind of like DIY art, but there's also like the art world and like gallery shit that's like very elitist, but also like the one plus is that it's very like theoretical and conceptual and like kind of takes things in a deconstructed manner that I find really interesting. So like art comes with that, but then like music, at least like the music that I'm involved in, is like, you know, more DIY, like people just like doing things, and like, you know, it's sick when someone's just screaming their heart out and writing on the floor or some shit. So it's like the context for music is like a bit like, yeah, like less conceptual, like less like intellectually driven. I feel like, not that it isn't at all, but like compared to visual art, and I feel like it's kind of like that. And then like poetry, I find, this might be mean, but I find the poetry world to be very weak, and like I don't poetry read.
Damn. Poetry.
True though. It's
The
true.
wall poetry.
Bougie ones where like everyone's really clean and like dressed up, wearing like coats, or like, I don't know, whatever designer like Fifth Street shit. And like, you know, they're just reading from a book, and it's so boring because they're not performing at all. But like it's a performance, and so, and I get so like and so it's like I also seek to like improve upon that, but like cross genre a little bit. So it's like my music is a way of improving upon poetry performance, I feel like. And then like my art, I feel like, is trying to create a balance between like what I feel like is, you know, like DIY stuff that doesn't really get as much attention as it deserves, and also and the elitist shit that, you know, I like the big brain stuff, but also like the actual logistics of being the art world is like BS, and like I hate that. So it's like I also feel like I'm trying to like compensate for these various contexts by like stealing the strengths of one thing to like another.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say that like I don't know if it comes from like you being a multimedia artist, or if you just have like a remarkably healthy sense of self in general. But when you were talking about like you know, your response to how others respond to your work, I thought it just was fascinating, and this feels so weird to say, but like incredibly healthy seeming to be like, oh, their response to my art like says just stuff about them. It talks about their preferences or their background or their like whatever, as opposed to just like, the fuck, like they don't like my shit, like Jesus Christ. And you know, I wonder if part of that is just because you dip your hand in so many different buckets, like you're not attached to like, I only know how to do these emo songs. And it's just all passion, baby. So if you don't like it, you're not liking me, you know? Yeah, exactly. Middle fingers up to the fucking world, because they don't get it, and they never will. But yeah, that's lit.
Thanks. Yeah. It definitely is kind of like a thing where it's like, oh, this one person doesn't like one part of thing. Oh, that's fine. I have like 8 others. Or like someone's gonna like it and not like another part of thing. Like that's fine. And also it's just like interesting to me to think about what it tells me about that person, the way that they like will respond to my work, and what parts that they seem to understand, and what parts they kind of just didn't get at all. And it's just like the more you do it too, the less sensitized you are. Because at this point, like, I mean, I've always been very like shy and like kind of like had a lot of low self-esteem for like a really long time, but I felt like art was kind of like the one place where I felt pretty confident in myself, or like felt like I can express what I need to express. And so I don't know, like I've always felt very like strong as an artist. And so yeah, I don't know, it's just like, or it's more like my love for art is so much stronger than like my fear of, I don't know, like someone not liking something for some reason.
Oh yeah, and it feels like it's like your curiosity really shining through too, right? Because it's just like I feel like curiosity and anxiety are like two sides of the same coin, where it's like anxious is like, oh God, why didn't they like it? Jesus God, why? Whereas curious is just like, huh, why'd they get into that, but not that one? Like, that's so neat. Like, what is that telling me? And like, that's the orientation that I want to have with the world so badly, but not at all.
It's a good one. You'll get there.
Thank you. Please show me your ways.
Just do your best and do it a lot.
Do your best, do it a lot. I like that.
I mean, I think that's pretty punk as fuck. Honestly, if we're still talking about like definitions of punk, I mean, kind of like thinking about like the idea of it being like subversive and like counterculture kind of thing, like kind of even just saying like, fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. You know, like who cares what anyone else thinks?
Yeah, here's my Marxist
lens.
Here's my Marxist lens on punk, which is that like it is part of our effort to actually be subjects and agents within history, not just objects that are acted upon, right? Not just consumers of media or of art, and not just like passively, just, you know, passengers like in the world as we go along. It's actually being able to like, you know, interpret the world in front of us and meet it with a question, with a contradiction, try to resolve that through our expression, through our art. And I feel like it's been a long road for me to sort of like figure out the difference between shitty individualism, and, like that can come from punk too, where it's just like whatever I want to do, and you know, like just whatever the fuck, versus an actually really healthy sense of self or grounding, where you're just like where you're just like, oh, like I'm just gonna do the thing that works for me, because like my personal experience of the universal is fundamentally gonna be different from other people, so I'm gonna try my best a lot.
Yeah, like so much of getting better at art isn't really like practicing techniques, although that is very important. But like the most important thing is like getting better at yourself and like being yourself and like being honest with yourself.
Oh yeah, chipping away at the fake bullshit self that we're like, I think we get constructed from society and our expectations and everything else, and it's just like, oh shit, it's actually like cool and fine that I'm like deficient in this one thing or quite good at this thing, or I show up in this way or that way. It's like your curiosity, like, oh, isn't that dope?
Yeah, or like once you see the system for what it is and like the reigning, you know, like mainstream values or whatever, it's easier to see like your shape and like accept your shape as whether it's, you know, whatever.
The more that we talk about kind of like radicalizing and growing up, it seems like the more that we're like, everything's important, nothing's important, do everything all the time, but not too much. It's kind of hard to reconcile those things. I forgot what I forgot what my question was with this. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think like it's hard because there's so many like contradicting things that are being said and they're all true, and it's kind of like it really just takes this like kind of spiritual solidity to be like, you know, it's all true, everything's true, but like what do I want in this moment right now? And that's why, and I think that's why it's been so important for me this year to like think about bodies and like existing in a body, and but in like a healthy way where you're like paying attention to the like specifics of you, your body, yourself, and like I don't know, like I think about it like my body is like my exact shape, and like this is the shape and the space that I take up exactly. So it's kind of like it comes down to having like holding the big knowledge of like everything being true in its own respect, but also like going deep into yourself and kind of being like, what do I want right now? I want to go for a walk. I want to feel some sunshine. I'll eat some ice cream. I want to work a bit. I'm tired. Like, what do I feel like in my skin?
Yeah, I feel like that kind of ties into before when you're talking about like, you know, like what are people like when they're alone? You know, I realized that's like a big question that came about towards the beginning of pandemic, when a lot of people were becoming unemployed and places were shutting down, is kind of like, well, what do I do now? What do I do with all my time? Who am I really? You know, if I'm not an employee, then what do I do with myself? You know, and at the same time, a lot of people are receiving unemployment and stimulus checks too, having stability financially, at least a little bit more than before, and yet still being so flabbergasted as to how to just be, you know?
Yeah, I think that was really an interesting experience to like suddenly end up being so alone, especially because I like live by myself for now. And so it was like extra like solitude. But in some ways it was like I felt like I was able to deal with that pretty well, just because it reminded me of like the way that I grew up. I grew up like pretty isolated and like alone by myself all the time anyways. So it was like it was almost like kind of having to go back and like reconcile with that. And it's like really scary to like have to face yourself and like to have to take ownership over like how complex you are as a human being, and like how much of our identity is informed by these like, you know, external measures of validation of like career, you know, appearance, whatever counts as success, and to kind of like take and to like find like the emotional strength to be like, well, like for me, like I think like this for me is like my measure of success. I don't know, like it just takes so much simply because like everything that we grow up learning is like against that and like disencouraging you from that. So I don't know, but I feel like in some ways like forcing you into this kind of isolation, I feel like I don't know if any other people have had this experience, but I feel like it helped me kind of like sharpen that a lot.
You know, it did for me, but it put my life in crisis to do it. That was definitely a big thing for me.
It's very like do or die, like figure your or die.
It was like straight up like like a healing arc pretty much, because I was just like, you know, oh shit, like I've been super unhappy in my organizing job that I've been at for 3.5 years. Like this other relationship I'm in just like isn't working out, isn't healthy. Finally, like looking these things in the eye and being like, shit, this is real. So I guess I gotta like, yeah, be able to know that there is no right answer except for my right answer, you know, like have that flexibility and that solidity that you're talking about. I wish I had your energy like fucking like 3 months ago. Come on now.
I mean, okay, no. I feel like this one question has like wrecked people's lives. It's just like, why get up in the morning? Why? You know, if you have nothing to do, you have a whole day open, you don't have anything the next day or the next day, you have enough money to do whatever you want. Why get up?
I haven't been able to answer that for half this pandemic. That's been part of my problem. Is I'm just gonna stay here.
Oh my God. I feel like I have no problem answering that, and I'm like the only person that's like that. I'm just like, I don't know, and I want to get up so I can do them because everything that I love is so exciting and I want to get into it.
And then for a while, it was like really being outside. I know for a lot of people, like picking up gardening. Some people were, I don't know why this like became a phenomenon of everyone making bread. Now it's like knitting. I don't know what it is.
Bread is delicious.
It is. But yeah, it's like, who are we really when we're left to our own devices? And that kind of also brings me to what Rafael was talking about earlier when we're talking about like radicalizing. Is just like, well, what do you need to exist? What do you want out of this world? You know, what am I going to do with my life because of who I am? You know, what can I do? Why get up in the morning?
I'm working on it. It's just wild because like for me and like other people that I'm like very close to in the organizing world, like we literally have to force ourselves to do like daily reflective practices. Like I was doing mine earlier in this little journal of like, what's a thing today that I did that brought me joy? What's a thing that I can do tomorrow that will bring me joy? What's a thing I can do to heal? Like I have to actively think about that, or else like it's not going to be anywhere on my radar, because so much of my life is essentially trying to make up for my lack of worth by, you know, sacrificing myself on the altar of the revolution and shit.
I mean, you're constantly violent, you know, right there.
What was that?
You're constantly like confronting violence all the time. You know that's
In
gonna
an
take a
acting
toll on you.
myself, because I'm like just listening to a fucking like prison guard inside of my own head who's telling me like, come on, man, why are you in bed right now? Because there's so many things that it's all on your shoulders. What are you doing? And it's messy. Now, I was just gonna like land the plane with the thing that you had said about like both of y'all have said about like actually figuring out who you are when you're alone. When I realized how bad my overwork was like 2 years ago or so, and I actively was like, nope, I'm gonna have actual weekends, all this stuff. I realized that the overwork wasn't actually the problem. The overwork was a solution, because my problem was I don't have enough personal relationships anymore. I don't remember what brings me joy anymore. So I don't know what to do with my free time. So I'm just going to work through the whole weekend or worry about shit, you know? So it's just like getting back in touch with that, or even realizing that you like deserve to get in touch with that can be really hard. Except for some people apparently. So, you know.
Hey, I mean, we all have our own little things.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, this is the next question I have is the same similar question to what I asked Rafael earlier, and this is a broad question, but what do you want for the future? And I guess this also relates to what we were just talking. What do you want?
I want the world. I want to burn everything down and make it anew. I want everyone to be like fucking taken care of, because we have the resources to do it, resources to be distributed in a fair way, everyone to have like their own fair chance at like crafting whatever their own happiness or like meaning in their life is. I mean, it's like, you know, we're never gonna get rid of all unhappiness or evil in the world or whatever, and like, you know, yin and yang, like we need to have a little bit of everything. But I think like there shouldn't be like mass systemic cruelty the way that it exists now. Like, fuck that. I don't want to see any of that shit. Like, I want people's lives to be like fulfilled by their relationships and communities and around them, as well as like the individual meaning, whatever it means to that person, like in everything that the world has to offer. The world is so big. Like, yeah.
Definitely. Are there any particular ways that we can support you right now?
I think just like, you know, sharing, supporting my work, like engaging with my work, I think is like very important to me, because like I don't make it anymore just to satisfy myself. Like I make my stuff with the intention of like, you know, hopefully other people interacting with it, engaging with it. You know, you can project on it, whatever, that's fine. But just like reminding me that I'm not, you know, by myself talking to a void place.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell the world?
Don't be afraid of yourself.
Oh my God. Oh,
Yay!
oh.
Yay! Okay. Okay. Talk to them on Twitter about anime.
Personally attacked.
Where did you find this person? I'll follow whatever church you're starting. Yeah, let's do it.
Rock on, let's do it.
Fuck it.
I mean, I got nothing else to do. Yeah, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and close out and say thank you both for talking about your big ass brains and this wonderful ass future that I want to be a part of. And thank you both for all of the ways that you just put yourselves out into the world. Even if it's like this like small modicum of insight that other people might take away from, I think it's really important and really wonderful. And I'm really grateful for all that both of you do. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you. This is so fucking cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and close out and just go ahead and say that this is Grimier Wednesdays. If you haven't already donated to Virginia Anti-Violence Project, the link is virginiaavp.org/donate. Donate today, donate tomorrow, donate as a recurring donor every month, up to you. Or if you're not in Virginia, if there's a local or organization serving survivors of violence, particularly in marginalized communities, please find them, get involved, support your local survivors. Thank you all, and hope you have a good night. Yay.